In this module, we'll discuss the role played by colonial education and economic policies in giving English the status that it enjoys today. The current power and prestige of English as an international language, as a language which is used for global international communication, or in other words, what we call the world English, is a result of codifying by colonizers. As we know, codifying involves the development of different grammar textbooks and also the dictionaries in a language. But codifying also involves assigning of different functions to a language. The language which is assigned more serious, important functions, of course, enjoys more prestige in a society. So when English was being codified in India, undivided India, it was assigned very important functions, and therefore it enjoyed more prestige among all the other languages which were used in this region. The colonizers also defined what true knowledge was and who could impart this knowledge. This brings us to the age-old controversy debate between Anglicism and Orientalism. Orientalism can be defined as scholarly knowledge of the language and culture of the East. It also includes the recognition and deep respect for ancient culture, not only of the East, but also of the West. In terms of colonizing of the world, and especially this part of the world, that is South Asia, Orientalism also meant a policy or policies to encourage indigenous languages in India or other parts of South Asia or Southeast Asia that the British had colonized. Anglicism, on the other hand, means recognition of the development in Western science and technology. Anglicism also means recognition of knowledge which is useful and practical, as against knowledge which people acquire for the sake of knowledge only. So it's not only knowledge, in fact it's not knowledge that one acquires for knowledge's sake, but it is knowledge which is useful, and therefore it includes the Western knowledge of science and technology. Again, in terms of colonial policies, it meant a policy to substitute English as a medium of instruction or a medium of acquiring knowledge at the cost of other languages. That is how Anglicism was viewed then. However, the belief that Anglicism completely displaced or replaced Orientalism is a misconception, because we see that the two systems coexisted. The two systems continued side by side. The colonizers, they wanted to educate a small minority in English and did not want to teach the masses in English. So this coexistence of the two systems was actually manipulated by colonial powers in this way, when they opened the doors to English education to only a small minority, whereas the rest of the population was restricted to the use and learning of indigenous languages only. The idea was to produce an English-educated elite and vernacular-educated masses to serve colonial economy. So the idea was that those who had English education would be given higher positions in government and administration, and it would be made sure that they were loyal to the British Empire, whereas the other menial jobs, labours, etc., or the job which included manual labor, they will be carried out by people who did not have English education. And in this way, the colonial economy will continue to thrive. The English believed, just as they thought that it was their ethical responsibility to humanize and civilize the nations which they had come to control, they felt that it was their ethical responsibility again to teach English. So just as they justified their colonization, their imperialistic designs by saying that they had come actually to do the rest of the world or the regions that they colonized a favor by civilizing them and humanizing them. Similarly, they thought, or they gave the impression that giving English education was also their ethical responsibility, because it was extremely important for the civilizing of the people they had come to rule. However, it was not an easy job to give English education to the entire population that they had colonized. It required a lot of resources, and the British regime then did not have enough resources to give English education to the entire population, let's say, of South Asia, India. So English was made available only to a small minority, because the English education to a small minority was a need of the British, because they needed people to help them run their colonies. So they needed the English educated people to serve as interpreters between the colonizers and the colonized, and also as clerks and carry out other administrative jobs. However, there were lots of difficulties inherent in teaching English widely. Their decision to teach English to a small minority was a practical decision, and it was not only that they had limited resources, but also there were other problems involved. For example, after being educated in English, the expectation was to be able to obtain a job in an office, and therefore people who could not get these jobs were likely to become discontented and therefore experience a lot of anxiety. And people with good education, with high qualification education in English, were of course not ready to do any manual labor. Whereas the colonizers, of course, needed not only clerks and interpreters, but they also needed a lot of manpower to do the other manual work. Therefore, they realized that teaching English widely was not to their interest, was not in their interest, and teaching only a small minority would be more beneficial. And therefore, they offered English education to a handful of people compared to the general population, and limited the rest of the population to education through vernacular only. This policy completely served the economic purpose of the colonizers.